Naledi could almost feel the weight lift off her shoulders as the bus rolled into Gaborone. After months of late nights studying and juggling part-time jobs in Cape Town, she was finally done with exam. All she wanted was home, her bed, her mother's cooking, and a few days of peace. She dragged her suitcase up the familiar path, smiling at the sound of birds and the smell of dust after rain. Everything looked the same, and that comforted her. But the moment she opened her bedroom door, her smile faded. The room was unrecognizable. Baby clothes hung on the chair, diapers were stacked on her desk, and a small crib sat where her bed used to be. For a second, she thought she had walked into the wrong room. Then her sister, Kesa, looked up from the bed, a tiny baby cradled in her arms. "Oh, you're back," she said casually, like nothing was wrong. "I moved in here. You'll sleep in the lounge for now." Naledi blinked, trying to process it. "Wait, what? This is my room." Kesa just shrugged. "Deal with it. The baby needs space." Her mother's voice floated from the kitchen. "Don't start fighting, please." That night, Naledi lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling as the baby cried in the distance. She hugged her blanket tighter, the couch springs poking her back. This was supposed to be her home, her safe place. But as she listened to the cries echo through the walls, one thought kept repeating in her mind. When did home stop feeling like home? The days slowly turned into weeks, and what was supposed to be a short visit home started to feel like a punishment. Naledi woke up every morning to the sound of Kesa's baby crying and the chatter of her sister's friends filling the house. They came over almost every day, laughing loudly, taking selfies, and leaving baby bottles and snack wrappers scattered everywhere. The house that once felt peaceful now felt like chaos. Naledi tried to stay out of the way. She kept her clothes neatly folded in a small box near the couch where she slept. Her books, her pride and joy from university, were stacked in the corner like forgotten things. Every time she looked at them, she felt a pang in her chest. It was as if her whole life had been packed away to make space for someone else's. One morning, she found her favorite jacket lying on the floor, covered in baby formula. "Kesa, can you at least tell your friends to be careful?" she said, her voice tight. Kesa rolled her eyes. "Relax, Naledi. You're being dramatic. It's just a jacket." Naledi stared at her sister, speechless. "Just a jacket." That line echoed in her head long after she walked away. It wasn't about the jacket. It was about the way no one seemed to care how she felt. When Naledi tried to talk to her mother, hoping for some support, her mother only sighed. "You know, Kesa just gave birth. She's struggling. Be understanding, my girl." Naledi bit her tongue, trying not to say something she'd regret. She wanted to scream that she'd been understanding since the day she walked through that door. But instead, she smiled tightly and nodded. The house that once smelled like her mother's cooking now smelled like baby lotion and milk. The living room, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cramped and noisy. At night, Naledi would curl up on the couch, listening to the baby cry, her mother moving around the kitchen, and Kesa snapping at everyone in between. She started spending more time outside, at the library, the park, or even the shopping mall, anywhere that wasn't home. Sometimes she'd sit under a tree with her headphones in, pretending to study just to avoid going back. But no matter how long she stayed out, she always had to return to that couch. The same couch that dug into her back and reminded her that she no longer had a room, a space, or a voice in her own home. One night, unable to sleep, she whispered to herself in the dark, "One day, I'll have a place no one can take from me." It wasn't just a wish anymore, it was a promise. And for the first time in weeks, that thought gave her a small, stubborn spark of hope. Naledi trudged up the familiar path to her house after a long day at her internship, her bag heavy on her shoulder, and her mind full of spreadsheets and reports. She was tired, ready to collapse on the couch, maybe even sneak in a quick nap before dinner. But the moment she opened the gate, something felt wrong. Her belongings were scattered outside in large black garbage bags. Her textbooks, her laptop, her clothes, everything she had carefully packed and carried from Cape Town, was crammed into those bags, some of it ripped, some damp from the afternoon sun. Her chest tightened, disbelief and anger mixing into a cold knot. Kesa sat on the couch, one hand feeding her baby, the other scrolling on her phone, as if nothing had happened. "We needed space," she said casually, not even looking up. Naledi froze, her fingers gripping the gate. "Space? You mean my things? You threw my things outside." Her voice wavered, sharp and low. Her mother stood in the kitchen doorway, silent, arms folded, eyes down. "You can stay at Aunt Boydamello's for now," she muttered finally, her voice almost a whisper. Naledi's head snapped toward her. "What? You're choosing her over me?" she said, disbelief cutting through the anger. Her mother didn't answer. She didn't meet her eyes. She just turned back toward the kitchen, leaving Naledi standing in the doorway, trembling. Something inside her broke that day. The trust, the comfort, the sense of home, it all shattered. She knelt down to gather her things, feeling the rough plastic of the bags against her fingers, tears spilling over her cheeks. The baby cooed obliviously from the living room, and Kesa hummed a tune, feeding it without a care in the world. Naledi packed quietly, each folded shirt, each book, each small personal item a small act of reclaiming her dignity. She told herself not to cry, but the tears came anyway, hot and unstoppable. Her heart hurt, but as she zipped the last bag closed, a hardening settled in her chest. "I'll remember this," she whispered to herself. Not out of revenge, not out of spite, but as a marker, proof that she would never allow anyone to make her feel this small again. She slung the bags over her shoulders and walked down the street to her aunt's house, each step heavier than the last, but carrying with it a strange mix of sorrow and determination. That day, she lost her home, but she began to find herself. Naledi arrived at her aunt's house feeling drained, carrying not just her bags but the weight of betrayal and loss. Aunt Boidamello greeted her with a warm hug, as if she could feel the heaviness in Naledi's shoulders. The house smelled of baked bread and fresh coffee, quiet except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan. For the first time in months, Naledi felt a flicker of peace. That evening, over tea, her aunt said gently, "Naledi, don't let bitterness live rent-free in your heart. Use this pain to move forward. You're stronger than you think." Naledi nodded, unsure if she believed it, but the words planted a seed. The next day, she started looking at life different. She threw herself into work with a focus she hadn't felt in a long time, picking up extra hours wherever she could. Every paycheck became a step toward freedom. She kept a notebook where she tracked savings and jotted down apartment listings, imagining a space that would belong entirely to her. Her determination grew like a quiet fire, steady and unstoppable. Every night, she wrote in her journal, spilling out frustration, fear, and plans for the future. One evening, she paused, staring at the words she had written over and over. "They took my room, but not my will." It made her chest tighten with pride. Despite everything, she had control over one thing, herself. Months passed. Naledi's efforts paid off. Her hard work earned her a promotion at the internship, increasing her income and confidence. She finally had enough saved to look seriously at apartment. She walked into a small, sunlit flat one Saturday morning and felt a thrill she hadn't felt in a long time. The kitchen was tiny, the living room cozy, but every corner was hers. She signed the lease with hands that shook, a mix of nervousness and joy. As she moved in, she arranged her books on the shelves, stacked her favorite mugs in the kitchen, and placed a small plant by the window. For the first time in months, she could sit in a chair and feel like the space truly belonged to her. Every corner seemed to hum with possibility, freedom, and the quiet victory of independence. That night, sitting on the floor with her journal, she whispered to herself, "This is mine. No one can take it." For the first time since being pushed out of her home, Naledi felt grounded, strong, and ready for whatever came next. Naledi stepped back and looked around her new apartment, a small smile tugging at her lips. The place wasn't fancy, but it was hers. She had stacked her secondhand furniture just right, hung fairy lights above the window, and placed her graduation photo on the wall where the morning sun hit it perfectly. It felt warm, personal, alive. After months of chaos and heartbreak, she finally had a space that was entirely her. That afternoon, she brewed tea and invited Aunt Boidamello over. When her aunt walked in, her eyes widened, taking in the little apartment. "This place is beautiful," she said, her voice full of pride. Naledi felt her chest swell. "It's mine," she said softly, almost to herself. It wasn't just about the walls or the furniture. It was about reclaiming her life, her freedom, and her peace. Weekends became her favorite time. She read novels she had ignored for months, cooked dishes she'd learned in Cape Town, and even danced around the living room, spinning and laughing like no one was watching. No crying babies, no loud arguments, no feeling like an outsider in her own home. For the first time in a long while, she felt whole again. She journaled every night, capturing the little victories. A perfectly cooked dinner, a quiet evening with music playing, a long stretch of uninterrupted sleep. Each moment reminded her why she had fought to get here. Her apartment wasn't just a space. It was a symbol of her strength and resilience. But peace has a way of being fragile. One evening, as she sat curled up with a cup of tea and a book, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her mother. "Your sister's in trouble." Naledi's heart skipped a beat. Questions and worries collided in her mind. What had happened? Was the baby okay? Could she help without losing herself again? She put down her tea, staring at the fairy lights glowing softly against the wall. The life she had built, her first taste of independence, felt suddenly at risk. And yet, she knew one thing clearly. She had survived before, and she could do it again. This time, she was determined not to lose herself in the process. Naledi's phone buzzed late one evening. It was her mother, her voice trembling and thick with tears. "Case is in trouble. The landlord wants her out. She can't pay the rent, her mother sobbed. Nalady's chest tightened as she listened. She could hear the chaos in the background. Case's voice raised in frustration, the baby crying sharply, almost like a tiny alarm. It seemed everything that had once been Case's confidence and entitlement had come crashing down. Her boyfriend had left, leaving her alone with bills she couldn't manage. The father of her child refused to take any responsibility. The people who had depended on others now found themselves with nowhere to turn. Nalady stayed quiet for a long moment. She felt a mix of emotions, frustration at Casa, sadness for the baby, and a dull ache as the memories of being pushed out of her own room returned. She remembered the day she had packed her belongings into black garbage bags, the way her mother had looked away, and the suffocating weight of losing her home. When her mother asked if she could help, Nalady's voice was steady, even if her heart wasn't. "I can't help," she said softly. The words felt harsh in her mouth, but she knew she had worked too hard to let herself be pulled back into that chaos. Still, the sound of the baby crying haunted her. That tiny life, innocent and unaware, was the same child that had stolen her space, yet now it had no shelter, no comfort. Her heart ached despite herself. Later that night, Nalady lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Memories of the past flooded her, the couch she had slept on, the nights of feeling invisible, the bitter taste of being unwanted in her own home. Yet, through it all, a quiet voice reminded her of something her aunt had told her long ago. Kindness is strength, not weakness. She repeated it in her head, slowly, letting it settle. It didn't mean she had to undo all the hard work she'd done or put herself back in a place of pain. But it did mean she could hold compassion in her heart, even while protecting herself. The baby's cries, the chaos, the weight of Case's mistakes, they didn't have to drag her down. Nalady closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She couldn't solve everything. She couldn't fix Casa or her mother, but she could keep her heart steady. That night, she didn't sleep, but she felt a small, stubborn sense of clarity. Kindness was still hers to give, on her terms. A few days later, Nalady found herself walking up the familiar path to her mother's house. The air felt heavy and still, a sharp contrast to the chaos she remembered from weeks ago. The gate creaked as she pushed it open, and inside, the house felt quieter, emptier, almost hollow. She walked into the living room and froze. Casa sat on the floor, cradling her baby, eyes red and swollen from crying. The room smelled faintly of dust and old milk, and the sunlight streaming through the windows seemed harsh and unforgiving. It was the same room Nalady had once slept in, her space, her sanctuary, but now it carried the weight of regret and loss. Casa looked up, her voice trembling. I made mistakes," she admitted, her shoulders slumping. "I thought I could handle it all." Nalady's gaze swept over the room, taking in the scattered toys, the empty walls, the quiet absence of the life she once had there. She felt a mix of sadness, anger, and a quiet sense of justice. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "You took what wasn't yours," she said slowly, "and lost what you had." Case's tears fell freely now. She reached out, her voice desperate. "Please, Nalady, help me. I don't know what to do. I've messed up everything." Nalady stayed calm, her hands folded in front of her, heart steady. She felt the urge to rush in, to comfort her sister, but she knew boundaries were necessary this time. "I'll help," she said carefully, "but things won't go back to how they were." Casa nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes, even through the tears. Nalady could see the weight of her sister's exhaustion and the reality of the mess she had created. But she also saw an opportunity for accountability, for Casa to learn from the chaos she had caused. For a long moment, Nalady simply sat with her sister, letting the baby rest against Casa's chest. She didn't rush, didn't lecture, just held space for the moment, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. Finally, Casa whispered, "Thank you. I don't know how I can ever make this right." Nalady shook her head gently, a small, sad smile forming. "You'll figure it out," she said. "I'll guide you, but you have to do the work. And this time, I won't let anyone push me aside." The room felt heavy but honest, filled with the awkward, fragile beginning of rebuilding. Nalady stood, brushing off dust from her clothes, feeling a strange mixture of relief and determination. The tables had turned, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the power of being in control of her own life. Nalady took a deep breath as she listened to Casa plead for help. The desperation in her sister's voice tugged at something soft in her heart, but years of being pushed aside and ignored had left her cautious. After a long pause, she spoke, firm but calm. "You can stay, but there are rules. You pay your share, and you respect my space." Casa nodded quickly, her head low, humbled in a way Nalady hadn't seen before. I understand," she whispered. The first few days were hard. Sleepless nights returned, with the baby crying and waking everyone up. Casa struggled to adjust, often forgetting to clean up or leaving things scattered around the apartment. Naledi's patience was tested, but this time she was in control. She reminded herself why boundaries mattered and refused to let history repeat itself. Slowly, change began. Kesa started looking for work, spending hours on job applications and interviews. She cooked simple meals, cleaned up after herself, and most surprisingly started saying thank you. Those two words felt heavier than any apology she could have offered, a quiet acknowledgement of the wrongs of the past. Naledi noticed the little things too, the way Kesa paused before borrowing something, or how she checked in before inviting friends over. The apartment, once again filled with life and chaos, now had a sense of order. It wasn't perfect, but it was manageable. Over time, something fragile began to grow between them: trust. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. Naledi found herself laughing at Kesa's clumsy attempts at cooking, or offering guidance when the baby wouldn't sleep. Kesa, in turn, seemed to genuinely listen, showing respect for the space Naledi had fought so hard to create. One evening, as the sisters sat together on the couch, the baby finally asleep, Naledi realized how far they'd come. She looked at Kesa and said softly, "I didn't think I'd ever hear you say thank you, but here we are." Kesa smiled a little sheepishly and murmured, "I mean it. I really do." For the first time since being pushed out of her own home, Naledi felt a sense of balance. She was helping her sister, but she wasn't losing herself in the process. The apartment was filled with the familiar sounds of life: laughter, the baby cooing, the hum of a kettle. But now Naledi could enjoy it without fear or resentment. It wasn't perfect. Some nights were still rough, and old habits occasionally resurfaced. But the sisters were learning, and that was enough. Naledi had created a home where she could give, but also protect herself. In that space, the bond between them began to heal, quiet and steady, like a small plant taking root after a long winter. Months passed, and slowly, the balance Naledi had worked so hard to create began to pay off. Kesa had found a job, small at first, but enough to start building her own life. The baby grew, cooing and laughing, and the apartment, once crowded and chaotic, felt lighter, calmer. Naledi watched quietly as Kesa packed her things, the pile of bags and boxes a reminder of how far they had come. On the day Kesa was moving out, Naledi felt a swirl of emotion. The apartment would be quieter, emptier, but that was okay. She had worked hard for this peace, and now it was time for her sister to stand on her own. Kesa turned to her, tears shining in her eyes. "I don't deserve your kindness," she said, voice trembling. Naledi smiled softly, placing a hand on her sister's shoulder. "You didn't, but I gave it anyway," she said gently. There was no bitterness in her voice, only calm acceptance. She realized that helping Kesa hadn't been about control or payback. It had been about holding her own strength while giving someone else a chance to learn. The baby giggled suddenly, reaching out and tugging gently at Naledi's hair. She laughed, brushing the tiny hand away. The sound was light, full of innocence and trust, and for a moment, Naledi felt the weight of the past months lift. Watching Kesa close the door behind her, carrying her baby and her few belongings, Naledi felt a strange kind of peace settle over her. It wasn't victory, it wasn't revenge, it was closure. She had let go of the hurt, the anger, the feeling of being pushed aside. Her home was hers again, but more than that, her self-respect was intact. She walked through her apartment, touching the furniture, the books, the little corners she had made her. Every detail reminded her that she had earned this. She had built a life where her space and her will mattered. The echoes of past pain were still there, faint, but they no longer had power over her. Sitting down with her journal, she wrote a simple line: "I didn't just get my space back, I got myself back." For the first time in a long time, Naledi felt whole. The future was hers, full of freedom, quiet strength, and the knowledge that she could survive, set boundaries, and still show kindness when it mattered. And in that moment, with the apartment calm and the baby giggling in her mind, she understood the true value of what she had reclaimed. Not just her room, not just her home, but her sense of self. Naledi leaned on the railing of her apartment balcony, watching the sun dip slowly behind the city skyline. The sky glowed in shades of orange and pink, soft and calm, and for the first time in a long while, she felt completely at peace. Her voice echoed in her mind as she reflected on everything that had happened. "They took my room and told me to deal with it. So I did, by building a life where no one could push me out again." She turned back inside and smiled at the small crib she had placed in the guest room. It wasn't for a baby. It was for friends who needed a place to stay, for anyone who might be lost or struggling, just like she had once been. Every corner of the apartment reflected her choices, her freedom, and the quiet strength she had built over the years. Walking through the rooms, she paused at her bookshelves, her small desk, and the soft lights she had hung up. This was more than furniture or decoration. It was a home that belonged entirely to her, shaped by her effort, her patience, and her heart. No one could take this from her. She sat down on the balcony again, letting the warm evening air brush against her face. A soft smile spread across her lips. Home isn't where you're allowed to stay. It's where you choose peace, she thought. The memory of the chaos, the shouting, and the feeling of being pushed aside was still there, but it no longer hurt. She had built something stronger than anger or revenge. She had built freedom and self-respect. Naledi closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. When others took her space, she didn't shrink. She expanded it. She grew stronger. And now, watching the sunset, she knew she would never let pain make her small again.